Dust swirled across the Arizona territory as Xavier Keyes rode into Wickenburg, his weathered hat pulled low against the setting sun of 1878. Three small faces peered from the covered wagon behind him, their eyes wide with uncertainty in this unfamiliar town after weeks on the trail. Xavier's children, 8-year-old Thomas, 6-year-old Sarah, and 4-year-old Michael had been quiet for the last several miles, sensing their father's weariness and the finality of their arrival. The journey from Missouri had taken everything from Xavier. His savings, his strength, and most painfully, his wife Elizabeth, buried now beneath a simple wooden cross 200 miles back. Consumption had taken her quickly, leaving him alone to raise their children in a territory as unforgiving as it was promising. "Pa, are we staying here?" Thomas asked, his small hand gripping the wagon's wooden frame. Xavier nodded, pulling his horse to a stop before the town's only hotel. "This is Wickenburg, son. This is our new beginning." The town stretched before them, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, bank, and scattered houses beyond. The Hassayampa River glinted in the distance, a rare and precious resource in the desert landscape. Men and women moved along the boardwalks, some pausing to glance at the newcomers. "Let's get you settled for the night," Xavier said, helping the children down from the wagon. His large hands, calloused from years of ranching, guided them gently. "Tomorrow we'll find our land." The hotel was modest but clean, a 2-story structure with a small dining room attached. Xavier paid for a room with the last of his money, his children crowding around his legs as he spoke with the proprietor. "New to Wickenburg?" the older man asked, eyeing the children with sympathy. "Yes, sir." "Looking to claim land and start a cattle ranch?" The man nodded. "Good timing. The Barker property just opened up about 5 miles east. Old man died last month. House is still standing, though it needs work." Hope flickered in Xavier's chest. "Is it for sale?" "Talk to Miss Daniels at the land office tomorrow. She handles all that now." Xavier guided his exhausted children upstairs, settling them into bed with promises of a better tomorrow. After they fell asleep, he sat in a wooden chair by the window, staring at the starlit desert beyond. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel the crushing weight of his grief and responsibility. "I don't know how to do this without you, Lizzie," he whispered into the darkness. The children needed more than he could give them alone. They needed a mother's love, a woman's guidance. But his heart was a barren landscape, as dry and cracked as the desert outside. Morning came with the harsh brightness unique to Arizona. Xavier woke his children, helped them dress, and led them downstairs for a simple breakfast before making his way to the land office. The small wooden building sat at the edge of town, its windows clean and curtained. A sign reading Wickenburg Land and Title Office hung above the door. Xavier straightened his shirt as best he could, conscious of the dust of travel that clung to him and the children. "Best behavior," he reminded them before opening the door. The office was neat and organized, with maps covering the walls and a large desk dominating the small space. Behind it sat a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical style, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose as she examined documents before her. She looked up as they entered, her green eyes widening slightly at the sight of 3 children trailing behind a tall, weathered man. "Good morning," she said, rising from her seat. "I'm Josephine Daniels. How may I assist you today?" Xavier removed his hat. "Xavier Keyes, madam. I'm interested in purchasing land for ranching. I heard the Barker property might be available." Her eyes softened as she looked at the children. "Yes, Mr. Keyes, the Barker Ranch is indeed for sale. 500 acres with water rights to the eastern tributary of the Hassayampa. And the price, $500, which includes the existing structures." She hesitated. "Though I should warn you, the house is in poor condition." "Mr. Barker was elderly and lived alone for many years." Xavier nodded, calculating quickly. "I can pay $300 now, with the remainder to follow after my first cattle sale." Miss Daniels studied him, then glanced at the children again. The youngest boy was leaning against his father's leg, clearly tired. "Perhaps the children would like some water," she offered, gesturing to a pitcher on a small table in the corner. It's fresh from the well this morning." While the children gratefully accepted the water, Xavier and Miss Daniels discussed terms. He was surprised by her knowledge of ranching and land management, and more surprised still by her willingness to accept his terms. "I'll need references," she said, "but I can draft the paperwork today." "When would you like to see the property?" "As soon as possible," she nodded, closing the ledger before her. "I can take you there myself this afternoon if that suits you. I need to inspect the property for the final sale record anyway." Xavier hesitated. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition, Mr. Keyes. It's my job to ensure new landowners understand what they're purchasing." She smiled at the children. "And I imagine these little ones would like to see their new home." The afternoon found them in Miss Daniels' wagon, heading east from town along a rutted dirt road. The children sat in the back, excited by the adventure, while Xavier rode alongside on his horse. The desert landscape stretched around them, saguaro cacti standing sentinel, palo verde trees offering occasional shade, and in the distance, rolling hills that would provide grazing land for cattle. "Have you been in Wickenburg long, Miss Daniels?" Xavier asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. 3 years, she replied, handling the wagon with practiced ease. "I came to assist my uncle with his banking business after my father died. When my uncle passed last year, I took over the land office." "That's unusual work for a woman," Xavier observed without judgment. Josephine smiled slightly. "So I'm frequently reminded, but it suits me well enough, and Wickenburg has grown accustomed to my peculiarities." They crested a small rise, and the Barker property came into view. A modest ranch house stood in a clearing, surrounded by several outbuildings. A corral sat empty beside a barn, and beyond stretched the promised acres, dotted with mesquite and stretching toward distant hills. "Water's there," Josephine pointed to where a stream cut through the property. "It runs year-round, which is why this land is so valuable." Xavier felt something stir in his chest. Hope, possibility. This could be their home, their future. The children were already clamoring to get out of the wagon, eager to explore. The house was indeed in poor condition, roof sagging in spots, porch steps broken, windows dirty with years of neglect. But the structure was sound, and Xavier could see its potential. "It needs work," Josephine said, watching his face carefully. "But the bones are good. Mr. Barker built it to last." "I'm not afraid of work," Xavier replied, testing a porch board with his boot. "We'll make it a home again." The children had already disappeared inside, their excited voices echoing through the empty rooms. Xavier followed, cataloging repairs in his mind: new shingles for the roof, replacement boards for the porch, windows that needed reglazing. The interior was simple: a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with an old cast-iron stove, 2 small bedrooms, and a lean-to addition that could serve as another sleeping space. Dust covered everything, and mice had clearly made themselves comfortable in the cupboards, but it was shelter. "What do you think, children?" Xavier asked as they gathered in the main room. "Can I have my own room, Pa?" Sarah asked, her small face serious. "Is there a place for chickens?" Thomas wondered, always practical. "I'm hungry," was Michael's only contribution, making both adults smile. "There's a chicken coop behind the barn," Josephine offered, "and yes, plenty of room for everyone to have their space once it's fixed up." They spent another hour exploring the property, with Josephine pointing out features and boundaries. As they prepared to return to town, she surprised Xavier with a proposal. "Mr. Keyes, I know you're eager to settle in quickly. If you'd like to move out here tomorrow, I can arrange for supplies to be delivered from town food staples, bedding, whatever essentials you need to start. You can add it to your account and pay when you settle the remainder of the land purchase." Xavier was taken aback by her generosity. "That's very kind, Miss Daniels, but I've already imposed enough on your time. It's not kindness, Mr. Keyes, it's good business." Her green eyes held his steadily. "Wickenburg needs stable families to grow, and you strike me as a man who honors his obligations. Besides," she added with a glance at the children, "these little ones deserve a home as quickly as possible." Xavier found himself accepting her offer, recognizing the practical wisdom in it. They returned to town with plans made for the following day's move, the children chattering excitedly about their new home and the adventures it promised. That evening, after settling the children in their hotel room again, Xavier walked to the saloon for a much-needed drink and information. He needed to know where to purchase cattle, hire help, and establish the connections necessary for a successful ranch. The Desert Rose Saloon was typical of frontier establishments, noisy, smoky, and filled with men seeking respite from the day's labor. Xavier ordered whiskey and found a quiet corner to observe and listen. "You're the newcomer," a voice said beside him. A man about his own age, dressed in the clothes of a working cowhand, settled into the chair opposite him. "Heard you bought Old Barker's place. News travels fast," Xavier observed. The man grinned. "Small town, I'm Daniel Cooper, run cattle on the north side of the territory." They shook hands and Xavier introduced himself. Soon they were deep in conversation about cattle prices, grazing conditions, and the challenges of ranching in Arizona. Cooper proved to be a wealth of information and offered to help Xavier find stock at fair prices. "Settling in with just the young'uns?" Cooper asked eventually. "That's a hard road." Xavier nodded, his expression closing slightly. "My wife passed during our journey here." Cooper's face softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss. If you need help getting started, my boys and I can lend a hand. Community takes care of its own out here." By the time Xavier returned to the hotel, he had made his first friend in Wickenburg and had the beginnings of a plan for his ranch. Tomorrow they would move to their new home, and the real work would begin. The next morning brought Josephine Daniels to the hotel earlier than expected, accompanied by a wagon loaded with supplies. Xavier was surprised to see her dressed in a practical riding skirt and blouse, her hair braided and pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. "I thought you might need help settling in," she explained as Xavier stared at the wagon's contents: barrels of flour and sugar, coffee, bedding, tools, and other essentials. "Mr. Miller at the general store extended credit on my recommendation." "This is too much," Xavier began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "It's barely enough to get started, Mr. Keyes, and I've taken the liberty of hiring 2 local boys to help with the initial cleaning and repairs. They'll follow us out later today." Xavier was overwhelmed by her efficiency and generosity. "Miss Daniels, I don't know how to thank you." "You can thank me by making that ranch prosper," she replied briskly, though a slight flush colored her cheeks. "Now, are the children ready? We should leave before the day gets too hot." The children were more than ready, bouncing with excitement as they climbed into Xavier's wagon. With their few belongings loaded, they set out for their new home, Josephine leading the way in her supply wagon. The day passed in a flurry of activity. The 2 young men Josephine had hired, brothers named Isaac and Matthew Taylor, arrived mid-morning and set to work immediately, clearing debris from the yard and making essential repairs to the roof and porch. Xavier worked alongside them, grateful for their knowledge of local building techniques adapted to the harsh climate. Josephine, meanwhile, took charge inside the house. With the children's eager help, she swept out years of dust and grime, washed windows, and arranged the supplies she had brought to create a functional kitchen and living space. By mid-afternoon, the house was transforming from abandoned shell to habitable home. Xavier found her in the kitchen, supervising Thomas and Sarah as they washed dishes that had been abandoned in cupboards. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly, watching his children work happily under her direction. Josephine wiped her hands on her apron, a practical garment she had brought with her. "I know what it is to start over in a new place, Mr. Keyes. Sometimes a helping hand makes all the difference." There was something in her voice that spoke of personal experience, of hardships overcome. Xavier wanted to ask about her story but sensed it wasn't the time. "At least stay for supper," he offered instead. "It's the least we can do after all your help." She hesitated, glancing at the fading daylight outside. "I should return to town before dark. The Taylor boys can escort you back afterward," Xavier pressed. And I believe I make a passable stew provided we can find all the necessary pots in this chaos. Josephine laughed, a warm sound that filled the kitchen. Very well, Mr. Keyes. I accept your invitation. That first meal in their new home was simple but satisfying, a stew made from dried beef and vegetables Josephine had thought to include in the supplies. They ate at the old wooden table that dominated the kitchen, the children chattering excitedly about their plans for the house and the animals they hoped to have. Thomas wants chickens right away, Xavier explained to Josephine as he served her a second helping. And Sarah is determined to have a milk cow. Very practical children, Josephine observed with approval. You've raised them well. A shadow crossed Xavier's face. Their mother deserves the credit. Elizabeth was extraordinary with them. Josephine's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Keyes. How long ago did she pass? 2 months, he replied quietly. Consumption took her quickly, thank God for that mercy at least. We buried her on the trail. The children had gone suddenly quiet, and Xavier regretted bringing up such a painful topic. But little Michael broke the silence in his direct way. Pa says Mama's watching us from heaven, he announced, so she knows about our new house. Josephine smiled at the child. I'm sure she does, Michael, and I think she'd be very proud of how brave you all are. The moment passed, and conversation returned to more practical matters, the repairs still needed. Plans for acquiring livestock, the nearest neighbors, a family named Martinez, 3 miles to the south. As dusk fell, Josephine prepared to depart, the Taylor brothers waiting patiently with their horses. The children surprised her with hugs of thanks, which she returned with evident pleasure. Will you visit again, Miss Daniels? Sarah asked hopefully. I'm sure I'll need to check on the property again soon, Josephine replied, her eyes meeting Xavier's briefly, to ensure everything is proceeding properly. Xavier walked her to her wagon. Thank you again for everything today. We would have been sleeping on bare floors without your help. It was my pleasure, Mr. Keyes. Your children are delightful. She hesitated, then added more softly, this is a good place to heal, I think, for all of you. As he watched her wagon disappear into the gathering darkness, escorted by the Taylor brothers, Xavier felt something he hadn't expected, a lightness in his chest, as if some of the grief he carried had been momentarily lifted. Perhaps it was simply the relief of having a roof over his children's heads, or perhaps it was something more, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The following weeks were filled with backbreaking labor. Xavier rose before dawn each day to work on the house and outbuildings, making them secure and comfortable. The Taylor brothers continued to help part-time, and other neighbors stopped by to introduce themselves and lend a hand when needed. The community support overwhelmed Xavier, who had expected to face his challenges alone. True to his word, Daniel Cooper helped Xavier purchase a small herd of cattle, 20 head to start, with room to grow as finances allowed. Cooper also brought him 2 horses suited to ranch work and introduced him to a Mexican vaquero named Rafael who was looking for steady employment. Rafael's the best horseman and cattleman I know, Cooper told Xavier. Worked with me for 3 years before deciding to move on. You'd be lucky to have him. Rafael proved to be not only skilled but patient with the children, teaching Thomas how to ride properly and showing Sarah how to care for the chickens that now occupied the refurbished coop. He took up residence in the small bunkhouse behind the main house, becoming a steady, reassuring presence on the developing ranch. Throughout these changes, Josephine Daniels maintained a careful interest in the Keyes family. She visited officially twice to check on the property improvements, each time bringing small gifts for the children, books for Thomas, fabric for doll clothes for Sarah, wooden toy horses for Michael. Her visits always coincided with mealtimes, an arrangement Xavier suspected was deliberate on both their parts. On her 3rd visit, nearly a month after their arrival, Xavier invited her to stay for supper again. This time he had prepared more carefully, having Raphael bring fresh vegetables from town and attempting a fruit pie with dried apples for dessert. You're becoming quite the cook, Mr. Keyes, Josephine observed as she sampled the pie. These children won't starve under your care. Pa does all the cooking now, Thomas explained seriously. Mama taught him before she got sick. Xavier smiled at the memory. Elizabeth insisted I learn the basics, said a man should never be helpless in his own home. Your wife sounds like she was a very wise woman, Josephine replied. She was. Xavier's voice held warmth rather than pain now when he spoke of Elizabeth. She would have loved this place, the open sky, the mountains in the distance. She always wanted room for the children to run free. After supper, while the children cleared the table under Raphael's supervision, Xavier invited Josephine to walk with him to see the new calves born the previous week. The evening was cooling rapidly as they strolled toward the small pasture where the mother cows kept their young close. You've accomplished a great deal in a short time, Josephine commented, her skirts swishing against the desert grasses. Most men would take months to establish what you've done in weeks. Xavier glanced at her profile in the fading light. I had good reason to hurry. The children needed stability after so much upheaval. They reached the fence, leaning against the rough wood as they watched the cattle settle for the night. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant call of a coyote. May I ask you something personal, Miss Daniels? Xavier said finally. She turned slightly toward him. You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer, he smiled at her candor. Fair enough. I wondered why a woman like you, educated, clearly capable, chose to remain in a frontier town like Wickenburg. Surely you had other opportunities. Josephine was quiet for so long that Xavier thought she might invoke her right not to answer. When she spoke, her voice was measured. I came to Arizona to escape certain expectations in Boston. My father had arranged a marriage to a business associate, a man 30 years my senior with a reputation for cruelty toward his first 2 wives. She traced a pattern on the wooden fence with her fingertip. When father died suddenly, I seized the opportunity to join my uncle here before the marriage could take place. Xavier was shocked by her revelation. Your father would force you into such a match. He saw it as securing my future, she replied without bitterness. He wasn't a cruel man, just a practical one who valued financial security above happiness. And in truth, there are limited options for unmarried women of a certain age in proper society. And here, are there more options in Wickenburg? She laughed softly. Here I'm considered an odd spinster who inexplicably prefers land deeds to dinner parties, but I'm left to my own devices. I have my work, my home, and a measure of respect from the community. It's freedom of a sort. Xavier studied her face, seeing strength and something else, a guarded loneliness perhaps. Do you ever regret your choice? Never, she said firmly, though I sometimes wish. She trailed off, looking toward the house where lamplight glowed in the windows and children's laughter could be faintly heard. What do you wish? Xavier asked softly. Josephine straightened, her professional demeanor returning like a shield. It doesn't matter. We should return before it gets fully dark. I've imposed on your evening long enough. The walk back to the house was quiet, something unspoken hanging between them. As Xavier helped her into her wagon, their hands touched briefly, and he felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. From her startled expression, Josephine felt it too. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Keyes, she said formally, gathering the reins. Xavier, he corrected. After all we've shared, I think you might call me by my given name. She hesitated, then nodded. And I am Josephine to my friends. Are we friends, Josephine? A smile touched her lips. I believe we are, Xavier. As summer gave way to fall, life on the Keyes ranch settled into a rhythm. The cattle were thriving on the good grazing land, and Xavier had begun construction on a larger barn to accommodate the additional livestock he planned to purchase. The house was now fully repaired, with new curtains at the windows, sewn by Sarah under Josephine's guidance, and proper beds for everyone. The children were flourishing in their new home. Thomas had become Raphael's shadow, learning everything he could about cattle and horses. Sarah had taken charge of the kitchen garden and her beloved chickens. Even little Michael was growing more confident daily, exploring the ranch's safe areas under his siblings' watchful eyes. Josephine's visits had become a regular occurrence weekly now, and no longer disguised as official business. She brought books from her personal library to share with the children and taught Sarah and Michael their letters while Thomas was busy with ranch work. Her relationship with Xavier remained friendly but cautious, both of them aware of the growing attraction between them but hesitant to acknowledge it openly. The first real change came in late October, when a sudden illness swept through Wickenburg. The town doctor called it influenza, and it struck with particular virulence among the young and elderly. Xavier heard the news from Raphael, who returned from town with supplies and grim reports of families stricken. "Miss Daniels is among those who are ill," Raphael reported, helping Xavier unload the wagon. "The doctor has visited her twice already." Xavier felt cold fear grip his heart. After losing Elizabeth, the thought of Josephine suffering from a potentially deadly illness was unbearable. "How bad is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Raphael shrugged. "Bad enough. Mrs. Parker at the hotel said Miss Daniels has been in bed for 3 days with high fever. No one is caring for her since she lives alone." Xavier made his decision instantly. "Raphael, I need you to stay with the children. I'm going to town to check on Miss Daniels." Raphael nodded, unsurprised. "I will care for them, patron. Take what you need from the house." The ride to Wickenburg was the longest of Xavier's life, his mind filled with memories of Elizabeth's rapid decline and the helplessness he had felt watching her slip away. He couldn't bear to lose another woman who had become important to him, to all of them. Josephine lived in a small house behind the land office, a neat structure that reflected her orderly nature. Xavier knocked but received no answer. Testing the door, he found it unlocked and entered cautiously. "Josephine, it's Xavier Keyes." The house was quiet and still. He moved through the small parlor to a bedroom beyond, where he found Josephine lying pale and still beneath a quilt. Her auburn hair spread across the pillow in disarray. Her breathing was labored, and when he touched her forehead, it burned with fever. "Josephine," he called softly, taking her hand. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "Xavier, am I dreaming?" "No, I'm really here. Raphael told me you were ill." She tried to sit up but fell back weakly. "You shouldn't be here." "The influenza. I've already had this season's sickness," he lied smoothly. "Now lie still. When did you last have water or food?" She couldn't remember, which alarmed him further. Xavier set to work immediately, finding clean cloths to soak in cool water for her forehead and heating broth from the supplies he had brought. He coaxed her to drink small sips, wiped her face and hands with cool water, and sat beside her bed through the night as her fever raged. By morning he was exhausted but relieved to see her fever beginning to break. She slept more peacefully now, her breathing easier. Xavier took the opportunity to tidy the house and prepare more broth for when she woke. The doctor arrived mid-morning, surprised to find Xavier there. "Mr. Keyes, isn't it? The new rancher?" The older man set his bag down and moved to examine Josephine. "Yes, sir. I heard Miss Daniels was ill and came to help." The doctor checked her pulse and temperature. "Good thing you did. Too many are trying to weather this alone." He looked at Xavier appraisingly. "You have children, as I recall. Are they protected from this illness?" Xavier explained that the children were safely at the ranch with Raphael, away from town and the contagion. The doctor approved of his precautions and left medicine for Josephine, along with instructions for her care. "She should recover fully with proper rest and nourishment," he assured Xavier. "The fever has broken, which is the critical step, but she'll be weak for several days yet." Xavier sent a message to Raphael explaining the situation and asking him to continue caring for the children. Then he settled in for what he expected would be several days of nursing Josephine back to health. She was a difficult patient when fully conscious, protesting that she was imposing on his time and insisting she could manage alone. "You have your children and ranch to attend to," she argued weakly from her bed. "I'm perfectly capable of caring for myself now." Xavier ignored her protests, continuing to prepare meals, help her to a chair by the window for fresh air, and even brush her long auburn hair when she complained of the tangles but lacked the strength to manage it herself. On the third day, as she sat wrapped in a quilt by the window, she finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. "Why did you come, Xavier? Surely there were others in town who could have checked on me." He paused in his task of preparing tea. "Would you have preferred someone else?" "That's not what I asked." Xavier brought her the tea, sitting in the chair opposite. "I came because I couldn't bear the thought of you being ill and alone, because you've become important to us, to the children, to me." Her hands trembled slightly around the teacup. "I don't want your gratitude or obligation." "Is that what you think this is?" Xavier leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Josephine, when Raphael told me you were ill, I felt the same fear I felt when Elizabeth first showed signs of consumption. I couldn't lose another." He stopped, aware he was saying too much, too soon. Josephine's eyes widened. "Another what, Xavier?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Another woman I care for deeply, another person who has brought light back into our lives when I thought all was darkness." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything now." Xavier reached across and took her hand. "Just get well, that's all that matters for now." By the end of the week, Josephine was strong enough to manage on her own, though still weak from her illness. Xavier reluctantly prepared to return to the ranch, knowing his children needed him and that his prolonged absence was placing a burden on Raphael. "I'll return in 2 days to check on you," he promised as he gathered his things. "And I'll bring the children. They've been asking about you in every message Raphael sends." Josephine stood in the doorway, wrapped in her shawl. "Thank you for everything, Xavier. I don't know how to repay your kindness." He smiled, touching her cheek gently. "You've shown my family nothing but kindness since the day we arrived. Consider this a small repayment of that debt." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Xavier felt the strong urge to kiss her. But he restrained himself, mindful of her weakened state and the uncertainty of her feelings. Instead, he squeezed her hand and departed, promising to return soon. The children were overjoyed to see their father, bombarding him with questions about Miss Daniels and when they could visit her. Xavier was touched by their genuine concern for a woman who had become such an important part of their lives in just a few short months. "She's much better," he assured them as they sat around the dinner table that evening, "and she's looking forward to seeing all of you soon." "Can we bring her something?" Sarah asked. "To help her feel better." "That's a wonderful idea," Xavier agreed. "What do you think she would like?" The children discussed various possibilities, finally deciding that Thomas would draw a picture of the ranch. Sarah would gather eggs to bring, and Michael would pick wildflowers if any could be found in the late October landscape. 2 days later, true to his word, Xavier brought the children to town to visit Josephine. They found her much improved, dressed in a simple blue dress with her hair neatly arranged, though still pale and moving more slowly than usual. The children's gifts delighted her, especially Thomas's detailed drawing of the ranch house with all of them standing outside it, including Josephine herself. "You drew me with your family," she observed quietly to Thomas. The boy nodded seriously. "Because you're our friend." "Pa says friends are like family you get to choose." Josephine glanced at Xavier, who was watching the exchange with a soft expression. "Your father is a wise man, Thomas." They stayed for lunch, which Xavier insisted on preparing despite Josephine's protests. The children helped set the table and served the simple meal, behaving with unusual decorum out of concern for their still recovering friend. As they were preparing to leave, Josephine took Xavier aside while the children gathered their things. "I've been thinking about what you said before," she began hesitantly. Xavier waited, giving her time to find her words. "When I was at my worst with the fever, I had strange dreams," she continued. "In one, I was back in Boston, married to the man my father had chosen, living a life of material comfort and emotional desolation." She looked up at him. "In another, I was here in Arizona, but I wasn't alone anymore. I was part of something, a family." Xavier's heart raced. "And which dream did you prefer?" "I think you know the answer." Her green eyes held his steadily. "But I'm afraid, Xavier, I've been independent for so long, I don't know if I can be what your children need, what you need." He took her hands in his. "All we need is you, Josephine, just as you are." The woman who helped strangers when they arrived with nothing. The woman who teaches my daughter to sew and my sons to read. The woman who makes me remember what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow. A tear slipped down her cheek. I need time, Xavier. This is all happening so quickly. We have all the time you need, he promised. The children and I aren't going anywhere. November brought cooler temperatures to the Arizona Territory and significant changes to the Keyes Ranch. Xavier completed the new barn just as the first cold snap hit, providing better shelter for the increased livestock. The cattle had nearly doubled in number through careful purchases, and the first breeding season promised further growth in the spring. The house had been fully winterized, with additional firewood stacked neatly along the south wall and the roof repaired to withstand the occasional winter rains. Inside, Xavier had added new furniture, proper beds for each child, a larger dining table, and comfortable chairs by the fireplace. Josephine had recovered completely from her illness and resumed her duties at the land office. But her relationship with the Keyes family had evolved beyond professional or even friendly interest. She visited the ranch every Sunday after church, staying for dinner and often into the evening. Sometimes she brought small books for the children, seeds for the garden, once a kitten from a town litter that Sarah had immediately named Penny for her copper-colored fur. Xavier treasured these visits, gradually coming to know Josephine more deeply, her quick intelligence, her dry humor, her passionate opinions about everything from politics to poetry. They often talked late into the evening after the children were asleep, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. As Christmas approached, the children grew excited about their first holiday season in their new home. Xavier found himself wanting to make it special for them, a new beginning of family traditions in a place that was truly theirs. We should have a proper Christmas tree, he told Josephine during one of their evening conversations. Back in Missouri, we always cut a pine from the woods near our farm. There are pines in the foothills about 10 miles north, Josephine suggested. Some of the town families make an expedition each year to bring back trees. Xavier considered this. Perhaps we could join them. The children would enjoy the adventure. The Coopers and Martinses are organizing this year's trip, Josephine said. I could ask if you might join them. The tree expedition was scheduled for the second Saturday in December. Xavier and the children rode to the meeting point outside town at dawn, finding several families already gathered with wagons and supplies for the day's journey. Daniel Cooper greeted them warmly, introducing them to the others. Xavier was surprised to see Josephine already there, dressed in her practical riding skirt and heavy coat against the morning chill. I didn't expect to see you here, he said as she approached. She smiled, her cheeks pink from the cold. Mrs. Cooper insisted I join them. Said it wasn't proper for me to spend another Christmas with just a sad little branch on my table. The journey to the foothills took several hours, the wagons moving slowly over the rough terrain. The children rode in Cooper's wagon, listening wide-eyed to stories of Christmases passed in the territory. Xavier rode alongside, occasionally catching Josephine's eye and sharing a smile. The pine forest was a revelation to the children, who had grown accustomed to the desert landscape around Wickenburg. Tall trees stretched toward the sky, their green needles a stark contrast to the browns and reds of their daily surroundings. The air was cooler here and fragrant with pine. It smells like Christmas, Sarah declared, spinning in a circle with her face upturned to the canopy above. The families dispersed among the trees, each seeking the perfect specimen for their home. Xavier led his children deeper into the forest, Josephine accompanying them by unspoken agreement. What about this one, Pa? Thomas called, pointing to a moderate-sized pine with even branches. Too skinny, Michael declared before Xavier could respond. We need a fat one. It's not skinny, it's elegant, Sarah defended her brother's choice. Josephine laughed at their serious debate. Perhaps we should look at a few more before deciding. They wandered further, examining and rejecting several candidates. Xavier found himself watching Josephine as much as the trees, the way she engaged each child in conversation. pointed out interesting plants and tracks in the sparse snow, her obvious delight in the outing. Finally, they found a tree that satisfied everyone, full enough for Michael, tall enough for Thomas, and with perfectly spaced branches for Sarah's planned decorations. "This is the one," Xavier declared, removing his axe from its leather holder. The children stepped back to watch as Xavier chopped at the base of the tree. Josephine stood with them, one hand on Michael's shoulder to keep him from venturing too close. "When the tree is up, we'll need decorations," she said to the children. "What did you use in Missouri?" "Mama made paper chains," Sarah replied, "and we had some glass balls from Grandma. Those broke during the journey," Thomas added quietly. Josephine nodded. "Well, we can certainly make paper chains, and perhaps we can find pine cones to dip in wax or string dried berries. Can you help us?" Michael asked, looking up at her. "If your father doesn't mind," Josephine replied, glancing at Xavier. He straightened from his work, wiping his brow despite the cool air. "We would be honored to have your help, wouldn't we, children?" The tree fell with a soft whoosh, and the children cheered. Xavier trimmed the base and lower branches, then dragged it back toward the gathering place where other families were loading their selections onto wagons. The return journey began in early afternoon, necessary to reach Wickenburg before darkness fell. The children rode with their tree in the Keyes wagon this time, Xavier driving while Josephine sat beside him on the bench seat. "Thank you for including me today," she said as the wagon jolted along the rough trail. "It's been years since I participated in a proper Christmas tradition." Xavier glanced at her. "No Christmas celebrations in Wickenburg? Oh, the town has its festivities, but it's different when you're alone." She looked back at the children, who were busily planning their decorations. Being part of a family's Christmas is special. Xavier felt a surge of emotion at her words. "You know, you don't have to be alone for Christmas this year. We would love to have you join us, not just for decorating the tree, but for Christmas Day itself." She turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. "Are you certain? Christmas should be a family time." "That's exactly my point, Josephine." He kept his voice low so the children wouldn't overhear. "In these past months, you've become part of our family in all the ways that matter." Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "I would be honored to join your family for Christmas, Xavier." The week before Christmas was filled with preparations. Xavier and Raphael hung the pine tree in the corner of the main room, securing it with wires to the wall. The children, under Josephine's guidance during her visits, created paper chains, wax-dipped pine cones, and strings of dried berries to decorate it. On Christmas Eve, Josephine arrived early in the afternoon with a basket of small gifts and additional treats for the holiday meal. The house was warm and fragrant with pine and the spices from Sarah's gingerbread cookies, baked from a recipe Josephine had shared. "Something smells wonderful," Josephine commented as Xavier helped her remove her coat. "Sarah has been baking all morning," he replied. "And Raphael contributed his mother's special tamales for our Christmas dinner tomorrow." The children greeted Josephine with enthusiasm, eager to show her their final decorations on the tree and the small gifts they had made for each other. Even Raphael, usually reserved around visitors, welcomed her warmly, thanking her for the recipe book she had brought him from town. The afternoon passed pleasantly with final preparations for the holiday. As dusk fell, Xavier lit the lamps and candles, casting a warm glow throughout the house. Raphael bid them good night, heading to his quarters in the bunkhouse where he would celebrate in his own way with a small shrine to the nativity he had created. After a simple supper, Xavier surprised the children with a new tradition, reading the Christmas story from the family Bible Elizabeth had packed so carefully for their journey west. The children gathered around him by the fire, with Josephine sitting nearby in one of the new chairs. Xavier's deep voice filled the room as he read the familiar passages. The children listened solemnly, even Michael unusually still as the ancient words washed over them. When he finished reading, Xavier closed the Bible gently. "Your mother always said that Christmas is about hope, the hope that comes with new beginnings. I think she would be pleased to know we've found that here. Is Mama in heaven watching us now?" Michael asked in the quiet that followed. I believe she is, Xavier replied, his voice steady. And I think she's happy to see us building a good life here. Sarah leaned against his arm. She would like our tree, wouldn't she, Pa? She would love it. Xavier kissed the top of her head. And she would be proud of how you've all helped make our house a home. After the children were tucked into bed, with stern warnings about the importance of sleep on Christmas Eve, Xavier and Josephine sat by the fire with glasses of spiced cider. Thank you for sharing your Christmas Eve with me, Josephine said softly, watching the firelight play on the decorated tree. It's been the most wonderful evening I can remember. Xavier studied her profile, illuminated by the golden light. I can't imagine celebrating without you now, Josephine. These past months, you've brought joy back into our lives when I thought it might be lost forever. She turned to face him, her expression serious. I need to tell you something, Xavier, something I've been considering for some time. He waited, suddenly anxious about what she might say. I've been offered a position in Prescott, she continued. The Territorial Land Office needs someone with experience in property records and transactions. It would mean a significant advancement in my career. Xavier felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath him. When would you leave? They want me to start in February. She set her glass down carefully. I haven't given them my answer yet. And what will your answer be? He tried to keep his voice neutral, though his heart was pounding painfully. Josephine met his gaze directly. That depends in part on you, Xavier, on us. Us? She took a deep breath. These past months have changed me in ways I never expected. I came to Arizona seeking independence, freedom from the constraints of a life I didn't choose. And I found that independence built a life for myself I can be proud of. And now you've been offered recognition of that success, Xavier acknowledged, trying to be fair despite the ache in his chest. Yes, but I've also found something else here, something I wasn't looking for. Her voice softened. I found a man of exceptional character raising his children alone in a harsh land. I found 3 remarkable children who somehow worked their way into my heart. I found myself looking forward to Sundays more than any other day of the week, just to be here with all of you. Hope began to replace the dread in Xavier's heart. What are you saying, Josephine? I'm saying that I love you, Xavier Keyes, you and your children. And while the position in Prescott is a fine opportunity, I would rather stay in Wickenburg as a rancher's wife than leave as a successful businesswoman if that's what you want too. Xavier moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. Josephine Daniels, I have loved you since the day you took my frightened children into your office and offered them water. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I love the way you treat my children as if they were your own. I was planning to ask you tomorrow. I have a ring hidden in my coat pocket, a simple thing I purchased in town last week. Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. Are you asking me now? Will you marry me, Josephine? Will you join our family not just for Christmas, but for all the days to come? Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. He pulled the small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a gold band set with a single small diamond. It's not fancy, it's perfect, she interrupted, allowing him to slip it onto her finger. Everything about this moment is perfect. Xavier leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle meeting of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. When they finally parted, both were breathing rapidly, faces flushed with emotion. When? Xavier asked simply. Josephine laughed softly. As soon as possible. I see no reason to wait if you don't. New Year's Day, Xavier suggested, a new beginning for all of us. What will the children think? Josephine wondered suddenly. Should we wait to tell them? Xavier smiled. The children have been asking me for weeks when I was going to make you their new mother. Thomas even suggested I might need help figuring out how to ask properly. This made Josephine laugh outright. Wise beyond his years, that one. They love you, Josephine, almost as much as I do. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of brilliant blue sky unique to the Arizona winter. The children woke early, their excited voices pulling Xavier from sleep. He found them already in the main room, examining the small gifts that had appeared beneath the tree overnight. "Remember, we wait for Miss Daniels before opening presents," he reminded them as he stoked the fire. "When will she be here?" Michael asked impatiently. "Soon," Xavier promised. "Raphael has gone to fetch her in the wagon." He busied the children with breakfast preparations, letting them help mix batter for pancakes and set the table. The simple domestic scene filled him with contentment, his children happy and secure in their home, the woman he loved soon to join them, the future stretching before them filled with promise. The sound of wagon wheels announced Josephine's arrival. The children rushed to the door, with Xavier close behind. Raphael helped Josephine down from the wagon, tipping his hat to her with a smile that suggested he had already heard their news. Josephine was radiant in a deep green dress that complemented her auburn hair, which she wore loose around her shoulders. The diamond on her left hand caught the morning light as she waved to the children. "Merry Christmas," she called as they ran to meet her. Xavier hung back, watching as his children surrounded her with hugs and excited chatter. His heart swelled with love for all of them, his existing family, and the woman who would soon complete it. When Josephine finally reached the porch, she smiled up at him with such joy that Xavier couldn't resist pulling her into his arms for a quick kiss, much to the children's giggling delight. "Merry Christmas," he murmured against her hair. "The first of many," she replied softly. Inside, the children could barely contain their excitement as they gathered around the tree. Xavier and Josephine sat close together on the small sofa as the gift opening began. The presents were modest, but thoughtfully chosen new mittens for each child that Josephine had knitted herself, a pocket knife for Thomas, a rag doll for Sarah, wooden blocks for Michael. The children had made simple gifts as well, drawings, a whittled whistle from Thomas for his father, a cloth bookmark Sarah had stitched for Josephine. Xavier presented Josephine with a leather-bound journal, knowing her love of writing and record-keeping. Her gift to him was a silver pocket watch with his initials engraved on the case, a practical luxury he had never allowed himself. When the last gift had been opened and admired, Xavier cleared his throat. "Children, Miss Daniels and I have something important to tell you." 3 pairs of eyes focused on them intently. "Last night I asked Miss Daniels to marry me," Xavier continued, taking Josephine's hand in his. "And she has agreed to become my wife and your mother if you will have her." There was a moment of stunned silence, then an eruption of joy as the children processed the news. They surrounded the couple in a tangle of hugs and questions and exclamations. "When will you be our mother for real?" Sarah wanted to know. "Very soon," Josephine promised. "Your father and I are planning to marry on New Year's Day." "That's only a week away," Thomas exclaimed. Xavier nodded. "We don't want to wait. We want to start the new year as a complete family." The rest of Christmas Day passed in a haze of happiness. Raphael joined them for the holiday dinner, raising a toast to the engaged couple and their future together. The children were unusually well behaved, as if afraid any misbehavior might somehow jeopardize the wonderful news they had received. As evening approached, Josephine reluctantly prepared to return to town. She would have much to do in the coming week, arranging for someone to take over her duties at the land office, packing her belongings, and making preparations for the wedding. "Stay," Xavier urged as he helped her with her coat. "There's no need for you to leave now that we're engaged." Josephine smiled at his eagerness. "Propriety must be maintained for a few more days, my love. Besides, I have arrangements to make in town, and you have a house to prepare for a wife." He sighed dramatically, always so practical. "One of us must be," she teased. "Now kiss me goodbye properly before Raphael brings the wagon around." The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a flurry of activity. Xavier and the children cleaned the house from top to bottom, rearranged furniture to make room for Josephine's belongings, and even repainted the main bedroom as a surprise for the bride. In town, Josephine worked efficiently to transition her duties to her assistant, a young woman named Clara who had been training under her for months. She packed her books and personal belongings, distributed or sold furniture she wouldn't need, and met with Reverend Porter to arrange the simple ceremony. News of the engagement spread quickly through Wickenburg, generating congratulations and a few raised eyebrows at the speed of the courtship. But those who had observed Xavier and Josephine together in recent months expressed little surprise at the development. "About time," was Daniel Cooper's comment when Xavier told him the news. "Been obvious to everyone but you two since summer." The wedding was scheduled for noon on New Year's Day at the small church in Wickenburg. Despite the short notice, it seemed the entire town planned to attend a testament to the respect both Xavier and Josephine had earned in the community. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and surprisingly warm for January. At the ranch, Xavier helped the children dress in their best clothes, accepting Raphael's assistance with his own tie and jacket. "You look very handsome, patron," Raphael assured him as Xavier checked his appearance for the third time. "Miss Daniels is a fortunate woman." Xavier shook his head. "I'm the fortunate one, Raphael. To find love twice in a lifetime is more blessing than any man deserves." In town, Josephine prepared in her small house with the assistance of Mrs. Cooper and her teenage daughter. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, a cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered from Phoenix months earlier for an official territorial function she had never attended. "You make a beautiful bride, Mrs. Cooper declared as she arranged a crown of winter berries and greenery in Josephine's auburn hair. "That rancher won't know what hit him when he sees you walking down that aisle." Josephine smiled at her reflection, hardly recognizing the glowing woman in the mirror. She had never expected to marry, had built her life around independence and self-reliance. Yet here she was, preparing to join her life with a widower and his 3 children, her heart so full it seemed it might burst from her chest. By 11:30, the church was filled beyond capacity, with late arrivals standing along the walls and at the back. Xavier waited at the altar with Thomas beside him as his best man, the boy standing tall and serious in his new suit. Sarah and Michael sat in the front pew, fidgeting slightly until Mrs. Martinez gently reminded them to be still. At precisely noon, the church doors opened, and Josephine appeared on the arm of Daniel Cooper, who had offered to give her away in the absence of any family. A collective murmur of appreciation rose from the congregation as she moved slowly down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Xavier's face. Xavier felt his breath catch at the sight of her. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that this was right, that Elizabeth would approve, that his children would thrive under Josephine's care, that his own heart had healed enough to love fully again. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Xavier and Josephine had written their own vows, speaking from the heart about second chances and chosen families. When Xavier promised to cherish her all the days of his life, his voice broke with emotion. When Josephine vowed to love his children as her own, Sarah began to cry softly in the front pew. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Porter concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Xavier pulled Josephine into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers present. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier Keyes, the children rushed forward to embrace them, completing the family circle. The celebration continued at the hotel dining room, where the community had arranged a wedding feast. There was music and dancing, toasts and cake, and gifts far more generous than the newlyweds had expected: linens and dishware, tools for the ranch, books for the children, and a fine side saddle for Josephine from the Cooper family. As afternoon faded into evening, Xavier and Josephine prepared to depart for the ranch. Raphael would stay in town with the children for 2 days, giving the newlyweds a brief honeymoon before resuming family life. "Are you ready, Mrs. Keyes?" Xavier asked softly as he helped her into the wagon. Josephine smiled up at him, her heart full. "I've been ready since the day you walked into my office with 3 dusty children and a dream of starting over." The ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them content in the knowledge that they had all the time in the world now to talk, to plan, to build their life together. When they arrived, Xavier insisted on carrying Josephine across the threshold, making her laugh with delight. "Welcome home," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room where a fire had been laid ready for their arrival. Josephine looked around at what was now her home, the Christmas tree still standing in the corner, the children's drawings on the walls, the worn but comfortable furniture that would soon be joined by her own belongings. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace her husband. "Everything is perfect." Spring came early to Arizona in 1879, bringing wildflowers to the desert and new calves to the Keyes Ranch. The house had expanded with a new addition, a proper dining room that could accommodate the growing family and frequent visitors. Josephine had settled into ranch life with surprising ease, applying the same determination and intelligence to running a household that she had to managing the land office. The children had adjusted to having a mother again, each in their own way, Thomas by seeking her help with his studies, Sarah by shadowing her domestic activities, Michael by demanding bedtime stories and morning cuddles. Xavier watched his family flourish under Josephine's influence. His cattle business was prospering, with the spring roundup promising a good profit. The land he had purchased on faith was proving to be among the best grazing territory in the area, but his greatest joy was in the family they were building together. On a warm April evening, Xavier returned from checking fence lines to find dinner nearly ready. The table was set for 5, with the good dishes Josephine reserved for special occasions. "What's the celebration?" he asked, washing up at the basin by the door. Josephine smiled mysteriously. "Can a wife prepare a nice meal for her family without a reason?" The children seemed unusually well behaved as they took their places at the table, another sign that something was afoot. Xavier said grace, then began serving the roast beef and potatoes Josephine had prepared. "I have an announcement," Josephine said as Xavier filled the children's plates one by one. "Something important to share with all of you." Xavier paused, looking up at his wife curiously. She was radiant in the evening light streaming through the window, her eyes bright with some secret joy. "What is it, Mama?" Sarah asked, already comfortable with the title that had once seemed so unlikely. Josephine reached across the table, her hand joining Xavier's as he served the last plate. "Our family will be growing larger by Christmas. I'm going to have a baby." The news was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by a chorus of excited questions from the children. Xavier simply stared at his wife, joy spreading across his features like sunrise over the desert. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "We're having a baby." Josephine nodded, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. He says everything looks perfectly healthy." Xavier moved around the table to embrace her, heedless of the children's giggles. "I love you, Josephine Keyes," he whispered against her hair. "More than I can ever express." Later that night, with the children finally asleep after hours of excited speculation about their new sibling, Xavier and Josephine sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. "Happy?" Xavier asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Josephine leaned into his embrace. "Completely. A year ago, I never imagined my life could change so dramatically that I would find such fulfillment as a wife and mother." "Having regrets about giving up your career?" he teased gently. She laughed. "None whatsoever. Though I do still help Clara with complicated land transactions from time to time, she rides out for consultation when needed." "You've created a perfect balance," Xavier observed, "just as you've brought balance to our family." Josephine placed her hand over his where it rested on her still flat stomach. "Our family, that still sounds miraculous to me sometimes." "It is a miracle," Xavier agreed, "one I thank God for every day." They sat in companionable silence, contemplating the future stretching before them, a future filled with children's laughter, cattle lowing in the pastures, seasons changing across their beloved land. A future they would build together day by day with love as its foundation. "Do you remember what Thomas said on Christmas morning when we announced our engagement?" Josephine asked suddenly. Xavier smiled at the memory. "He said it was about time, as I recall. Apparently our feelings were obvious to everyone but us. Children see clearly sometimes." They knew I belonged here before I fully realized it myself. And now, Xavier asked, turning to look into her eyes. Now I know this is where I was always meant to be, Josephine replied with certainty. With you, with our children, building something lasting and beautiful together. Xavier kissed her under the starlit sky, surrounded by the home and land they shared, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them together, a journey that had begun with a dusty arrival in Wickenburg and would continue for all the days of their lives. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and the desert wind carried the sweet scent of spring blossoms across the land that had become their sanctuary and their promise for tomorrow.